What does it take to end 132 years of colonial rule? In Algeria, the answer came in the form of 8 years of bloodshed, terror, and unthinkable cruelty. The French Empire, once seen as a beacon of liberty and enlightenment, used torture chambers, mass executions, and scorched earth tactics to silence a people who only wanted to be free. This is the story of a war that France refused to call a war, of atrocities committed in the name of civilization, and of the resistance that refused to bow. Welcome to Sands of History, where we bring to light the forgotten struggles, hidden truths, and untold legacies that shaped our world. If you value real history, raw, unfiltered, and essential, please like, share, and subscribe. To help us keep creating content like this, support links are in the description below.
Algeria under French rule, a colony in disguise. France invaded Algeria in 1830, beginning a brutal conquest that would eventually turn Algeria into not just a colony, but an extension of France itself. By the early 20th century, Algeria was divided into 3 French departments, legally considered part of the metropole. But this integration applied only to European settlers, or Pieds Noirs, who were granted full rights as French citizens. Indigenous Algerians, over 90% of the population, were denied citizenship unless they renounced Islam and adopted French civil law, something very few did. Economically, politically, and socially, Muslims were marginalized. Europeans owned most of the land, controlled the cities, and dominated the political system. By 1954, over 70% of Algerian Muslims were illiterate, and poverty was widespread. The rise of nationalist resistance. Algerian nationalism had deep roots, influenced by thinkers like Emir Abdelkader, the early 20th century Algerian Muslim ulema, and later Messali Hadj, who founded the Algerian People's Party, PPA. However, decades of peaceful political activism had failed to bring reforms. One major turning point came after World War II. Over 150,000 Algerians had fought for France during the war, hoping their service would be rewarded with political rights. But when peaceful protests in Sétif and Guelma on May 8, 1945, the day of victory in Europe, turned violent, French forces responded with indiscriminate massacres. Historians estimate between 15,000 to 45,000 Algerians were killed in what is now seen as a precursor to the 1954 uprising. It sent a clear message: France would not grant freedom, it would have to be fought for. The FLN strikes. November 1, 1954. On November 1, 1954, the National Liberation Front, FLN, launched a coordinated wave of attacks across Algeria, targeting police stations, army outposts, and settler farms. This marked the beginning of what Algerians call the War of Liberation. The FLN was not just a rebel group. It was a revolutionary movement, aiming to unify Algeria's diverse nationalist factions under one banner. Its goal was complete independence, and it saw armed struggle as the only path forward. France's initial response was to dismiss the attacks as the work of bandits. But within months, it became clear that the FLN had deep roots and significant popular support, especially in rural areas. France responds with brutality. The French state declared a full-scale military operation. Between 1955 and 1962, over 500,000 French troops were deployed. Algeria was flooded with soldiers, paratroopers, police, and secret agents. This was not a conventional war. It was a war of shadows, of information, and of ideology. France used every tool at its disposal to crush the rebellion. Torture was systematic. During the infamous Battle of Algiers, 1956-57, French paratroopers, led by General Jacques Massu, conducted mass arrests, curfews, and house-to-house raids. Captured suspects were electrocuted, waterboarded, burned, or beaten. Many disappeared, their bodies dumped in unmarked graves or the sea. Even prominent members of French society spoke out. The journalist Henri Alleg, arrested in 1957, later wrote La Question, a chilling first-hand account of torture. The book was banned in France, but smuggled and published abroad, igniting international outrage. General Paul Osereses, in his 2001 memoir, openly admitted to extrajudicial killings and torture, justifying them as necessary to win the war. Mass killings and scorched-earth policies. France's strategy in rural Algeria was to drain the sea in which the FLN swam. Entire villages were evacuated. Crops were burned, wells poisoned, and homes destroyed to cut off FLN support. An estimated 2 million Algerians, one-third of the population, were forcibly relocated to regroupment camps. These were surrounded by barbed wire, patrolled by soldiers, and often lacked food, sanitation, or medical care. Villagers caught aiding the FLN could be executed on the spot. One French soldier recalled, "We would shoot into the hills, not knowing if anyone was there. The message was, if you hide the FLN, you all suffer." FLN tactics, brutality on both sides. The FLN, too, committed atrocities. Its fighters launched ambushes, bombings, and assassinations targeting French settlers, soldiers, and Algerians accused of collaboration. One infamous FLN tactic was the use of urban bombings, particularly during the Battle of Algiers, where women smuggled bombs in handbags and placed them in cafes, cinemas, and train stations. The FLN also carried out purges of rival nationalist groups, particularly the Messalists aligned with the MNA. Thousands of Algerians died not at the hands of the French, but in intranationalist violence. This was not a war of heroes and villains. It was a war of desperation, fought with fire and fear. France divided, the war at home. By the late 1950s, the war had begun to split France apart. Prominent intellectuals like Jean-Paul Sartre, Albert Camus, and Simone de Beauvoir criticized the war. Sartre declared, "We are being made the accomplices of murderers." Mass protests erupted in Paris. Young men fled conscription. Left-wing parties and unions condemned the torture and massacres. In 1961, when thousands of Algerians protested peacefully in Paris, the police, under orders from Maurice Papon, opened fire and threw protesters into the Seine River. An estimated 200 to 300 people were killed. The massacre was kept secret for decades. Even the military began to fracture. Disillusioned officers formed the OAS, Organisation de l'Armée Secrète, a far-right terrorist group that tried to prevent Algerian independence with bombings, assassinations, and coups. Charles de Gaulle and the path to independence. The political chaos in France led to the return of Charles de Gaulle in 1958, who became president under the newly formed Fifth Republic. Initially vague on Algeria's future, de Gaulle gradually shifted towards self-determination. His famous words in 1959, "Je vous ai compris, I have understood you," left both settlers and nationalists unsure of his intentions. Facing continued unrest and pressure, he entered secret negotiations with the FLN. These culminated in the Evian Accords, signed on March 18, 1962, which guaranteed a ceasefire and a referendum on independence. On July 1, 1962, Algerians voted overwhelmingly, 99.7% in favor of independence. On July 5, Algeria declared itself a free nation. The human cost. The cost of Algerian independence was staggering. Algerian deaths, between 300,000 to 1.5 million, depending on the source. French deaths, around 25,000 military personnel and 10,000 settlers. Torture victims, tens of thousands, many never officially acknowledged. Harkis, Algerians who fought for France, up to 150,000 were massacred after the war. Many more were abandoned by the French government. Memory, denial, and the fight for truth. For decades, France refused to call the conflict a war. It was only in 1999, nearly 40 years after independence, that the French Parliament officially recognized it as such. In 2018, President Emmanuel Macron acknowledged that the state had run a system of torture. In 2021, he admitted that French colonialism was a crime against humanity. Yet, no formal apology has ever been issued. In Algeria, the war is commemorated as the birth of the nation. But even there, the legacy is complicated, marked by civil war in the 1990s, questions about the FLN's monopoly on power, and the scars of trauma passed down through generations. The price of freedom. The Algerian War of Independence was not just a chapter in colonial history. It was a brutal reckoning. It revealed that colonial empires do not end with parades and treaties, but with bullets, betrayal, and blood. France, the birthplace of human rights, became the torturer. Algeria, the colonized and silenced, became a symbol of resilience. History does not forget, and we must not either. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to Sands of History, where we dig deep into the struggles that shaped our world. To support our work and help us produce more content like this, please consider donating. Links are in the description below.